Good morning. Good morning, everyone. So, I have some words for you that we would never say around here. We've never done it this way before. So, this year, we set out very intentionally as a church to slow down during Holy Week. There's so much going on during this time of year. Family gets together. Little League started yesterday, kicked off their season with parades and all kinds of things. We've had a crazy Holy Week the last few years. We've done Palm Sunday into volunteer meetings for Easter Fest, into Maundy Thursday service, into Good Friday, into Easter Fest on Saturday, and then Easter Sunday. And we've almost crowded out the celebration of the most central event of our faith with just activity and busyness. And so this year we intentionally said, let's just try something different. Let's just slow down. Let's see if we can sit with the story a little bit more and make time for what's most important. And so we're doing some different things this year. Easter Fest this year is today, on Palm Sunday, instead of the day before Easter. We think that that's going to do a lot for us. We think that we'll be more fully present at Good Friday. We eliminated Maundy Thursday service, and we've brought elements of that into the service today. So that we can all come on Friday. We can make space in our schedule for that, to center around the story of the cross. And so it is different this year. We hope that you'll give us your input and your feedback, but we think it'll help us to more fully live into who we are, more fully be present for our community and with our family, and more deeply experience the story of Easter. And so today we have an odd move. We move from Palm Sunday and the story of Jesus coming into Jerusalem all the way to the upper room in the Garden of Gethsemane. So we have a lot of ground to cover this morning. So hang on. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but it's going to be meaningful if you'll stick with me through it. So spring training is almost over, right? Baseball season starts this week. Our world champion Astros, I think Thursday is their first game. You know, last year was a momentous year for the Houston Astros. On November 1st, we won the World Series, right? And this was the moment. A painter was commissioned to paint the moment of the victory, the moment that the Astros knew that they had won, and they rushed the field. This is an official painting every player on the team will get, and it'll be on display in Houston on the 28th of March, beginning just a few days down the road, a couple of days down the road, as a way to commemorate the start of this season. Just an incredible, incredible moment. And we all remember the homecoming on November 3rd, where we had a parade in downtown Houston to welcome our world champion Astros home. There was around 1 million people who lined the streets of downtown Houston shouting praises, shouting victory. It's just excited. You know, their victory was our victory, right? The victory of this team was the victory for Houston. And this was so momentous for us for many reasons. One, well, we know that back in 2011, 2013, those weren't great seasons. You know, we went from losing 111 games, just a short time, sorry to break open old wounds, y'all. I'm sorry. But we have to celebrate, right? Because this is a redemption story. All the way from losing 111 games several seasons back to winning it all, right? Taking the World Series. And in a year that we suffered from Hurricane Harvey, right? The spirit that the Astros channeled to play became the spirit of our city, right? It became the spirit of recovery. It became, the players would say that they were playing for something much larger than the game at that point. And in a way, the spirit of their city that they loved and that they called home carried them through all the way to victory. Well, as we gather on this Palm Sunday, I just wonder with me a little bit. Now, I know this would never happen in Houston, because we're not fair weather fans. But how much different would the homecoming have been if they had lost Game 7 in the World Series? Would there have been a parade through downtown saying, great effort, you made it all the way to Game 6, right? I mean, this is awesome. You made it to great Game 7. You could have won it. Would anybody have gone to the airport to welcome them home off the plane? What would social media have said? Would they have been supportive? Well, they gave it a great effort, right? Or would people have dogged them left and right? How would that have been any different? You know, that's the Palm Sunday story. So I want all of you to grab your palm branches for just a moment. Hold on to them. This was a joyous occasion in Jesus' lifetime. It was a day that would, well, remain etched in the memory of the church forever. It's a day when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. People lined the streets to welcome him. It was a parade. But it wasn't just any parade. Jesus and the people had very different ideas of what was going on. For Jesus, it was him entering into the last week of his life in a way that nobody could ignore. It was making a statement about his kingdom, about his ministry, about his life, and about what that means for us that we continue to process today. But the Gospels tell us that for the people, they lined the streets and waved their palm branches because of the miracles that Jesus had done. Two very different things. Now, of course, the miracles that Jesus did were for the people, but they were to point beyond themselves to something much greater, something much deeper, something that God was to be about that people did not fully grasp or understand. And so as Jesus rode into Jerusalem, there's several things that are going on. This is the scene of a conquering king coming in victorious in battle, coming into the city for all of the city to celebrate. And so this scene, that a king would have come in on the back of a noble horse, the people would have lined the streets, done the same thing, thrown their cloaks on the ground, cut branches from the trees and waved them, and hailed, "Long live the king," or, praises to the one who is victorious in battle, who conquered the enemy. Well, that's the scene here, and all the people are bringing all of their expectations, all of their hopes, all of their dreams, all of their desires for who Jesus is going to be. And in that moment, they're shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the conquering king, the one who will overthrow our enemies and put us in charge at last." The people were looking for Jesus to fulfill their expectations. We place a lot of expectations on Jesus, don't we? I always call it the tiny Jesus. We go to the tiny Jesus and say, "Jesus, give me what I want." Right? Come on, tiny Jesus. I want my kingdom to be built, and I want you to build it for me. Right? That's what was going on here. So this palm branch for us represents that moment, I think, where we're standing there on the side of the street, watching this parade happen, laying our cloaks down, proclaiming Jesus as king. But for Jesus, this was something very different. For he didn't choose a noble horse to ride into the city on. He chose a lowly donkey. This was a sign of peace, one who would usher in a time of peace, not one who would come and by force conquer an enemy. But the people missed it because they were lauding Jesus for all of the miracles that he had performed. John tells us that it was because of the raising of Lazarus that the people came and were lining the streets. They were hoping that he would do that for them too. But he was coming to do something much greater. For Jesus is showing the people God's expectations for the coming age. Do you see how that's very different? The people are there because of their expectations for what Jesus is going to do. Overthrow the Roman rule. Place one of us on the throne again. Gather our people from all of the nations back into the promised land. Jesus, you're going to do all that for us. And Jesus is saying, that's not what I'm about. I'm not here to usher in a new era by force. I'm not here to send a military in battle and to conquer people through war. I've come to usher in a reign of peace. And so if we're going to learn Jesus' expectations for our own life, we have to lay our expectations down for what Jesus will do for us and take up God's expectations for how we should live for Jesus. Let me say this again. We have to lay down our expectations for what Jesus can do for us and take up God's expectations for how we live for Jesus. We've got to lay symbolically this palm branch down and to say, "Lord, not my will, but yours be done. Not my life as I want it to be, but my life as you want it to be." We have to choose the way of Jesus. And so this week of Jesus' life is very profound. It speaks boldly through the words of Scripture, through time, and speaks to us today. What Jesus did in his last week of his life is highly significant because it communicates what he was all about, what he wanted us to remember. And so the church marks time according to the life of Jesus. This is the first day of Holy Week. And the church commemorates this event of Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. Now, Jesus knew in that moment when he instituted this parade what was going to happen. He knew that there were people plotting to kill him when he came into the city for the Passover. So choosing to enter the city in this way, he was choosing death. He was choosing to see the way of the Father fulfilled in him. And so the church marks time. Each day of Jesus' last week, the church celebrates the events. And I don't know if you've ever seen this unpacked, but on Holy Monday, we celebrate the anointing of Jesus at Bethany, where a woman without means lavishes a great amount of wealthy, expensive perfume upon Jesus, anoints his body really for burial and as king. And the disciples chide her. What a waste of resources. What a waste of money. And Jesus says, no, she has honored me with everything she had, and she's to be commended for that. Jesus curses a fig tree, says if it's not fruitful, cut it down. He cleanses the temple of those who were taking advantage of the poor by using the sacrificial system for their own benefit. On Tuesday, the church remembers that Jesus predicts his own death, and his disciples don't want to hear it. But yet he prophesies this is what is going to happen. On Wednesday, I love this. In the history of the church, Wednesday is known as Spy Wednesday, because it's the day that Judas accepts a bribe to betray Jesus into the hands of those who would arrest him the next day. Thursday is the day of the Last Supper and the arrest. We're going to commemorate that today. Instead, Friday is, of course, Good Friday, crucifixion, and on Saturday is Holy Saturday, the day that Jesus laid dead in the sealed tomb. That's what Holy Week is all about, and that's what God wants us to remember. This last week of Jesus' life is very significant because it communicates for us that life in his kingdom, once again, does not come by force. This is one thing that we have to know and have to remember. It comes through sacrifice and service. It is characterized by peace. And perhaps this is the most powerful part of this whole week. We accept it by choice. God's not going to make anybody live in his kingdom. God's not going to say, you will follow me, because love doesn't work that way. Love is freely given and freely accepted. And in the events of this week, Jesus is laying himself down and saying, I'm giving all for you, and all you have to do is to take it up as a free gift. That is all that is required. But yet, throughout all of these events, what's so profound is that his disciples don't get it. They struggle to understand. From Sunday, they're thinking, yes, maybe he is the one that will be the conquering Messiah, the one that we have waited for. In fact, that's why Judas betrays Jesus in the first place. All of his expectations for Jesus is that he would be the Messiah that would overthrow the Roman rule. And when those expectations were dashed, that's when Judas sold Jesus for a handful of coins, because Jesus didn't meet his own expectations. And I wonder, for us, how often are we Judas? How often are we willing to sell Jesus short when he doesn't meet the expectations that we place on him to build our kingdom? How often do we turn our backs on him and say, well, he didn't do for me what I want, so Jesus must not be who he says he is. But he's so much more than we could ever imagine. That's why on a day that we call Holy Thursday or Maundy Thursday, the last event that Jesus spent with his disciples, he wanted to drive this point home. That it's not about what we expect. It's about what God is going to do that defies all expectations. So it was the day of the Passover. And that's what everybody had come to the city for, is to celebrate this feast that commemorated this Exodus event that happened thousands of years before. This feast had been kept very faithfully by Jews throughout the ages, and Jesus was not going to let this opportunity go by. He asks his disciples to make ready an upper room for the Passover meal. And as they go into the upper room, they're eating the meal as tradition would have it. And he breaks from the ritual, and he takes bread, gives thanks to his Father, and breaks the bread and gives it to his disciples. And he says, take, eat. This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And I'm sure the disciples are confused at this point. Once again, they're saying, what? That's not what you're supposed to say in the Passover. I mean, there's very specific words here. What do you mean you're giving your body to us? And then later on, after supper, Jesus took the cup and he veered from the ritual again, and he said, "Drink from this, all of you, for this is my blood of the new covenant poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins." And once again, the disciples must have been bewildered. What do you mean? This is the cup of redemption. This is the third cup of the five that we drink during the Passover, and you're saying that you're pouring yourself out to redeem us? This is inconceivable, as they would say in The Princess Bride, right? I mean, their heads are exploding at this point. They're going, what is he doing? What is he saying? But they still don't get it. In Luke's gospel, at the table, as these events were unfolding, as Jesus is showing them bread and blessing it and saying, "I'm giving myself to you," and taking the cup and saying this, Luke records this little ditty. Check this out. A dispute also arose among the disciples as to which one of them was considered to be the greatest. Like, Jesus has just done this amazing thing, and they're still talking about who's the bestest of all, right? Jesus said to them, "The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? But I am among you as one who serves." Pretty amazing, right? He's saying, lay your branches down. Lay your expectations for what this is going to be and do for you down. Leave your pursuit of worldly power down. Empty yourself of all of that, because I've come to show you something greater. And what's amazing is in John's gospel, apparently in parallel with these events taking place, Jesus gets up from the table, knowing that they didn't get it. He takes out his outer robe, ties a towel around his waist, and begins to wash his disciples' feet. And they protest, "No, Lord Jesus, you can't do this. You can't take the role of a servant." And Jesus says it has to be this way. And then he gets up after washing his disciples' feet, puts his outer garment back on, and sits down at the table. And he gives the object lesson. He says, "Do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. But now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." You know, we're visual creatures, us human beings. We understand what we can see and do more than we understand what we hear. And so when the disciples still didn't get that it wasn't about them, Jesus made himself a servant. And this was the lowliest task that any servant could perform. Because this isn't like our roads today that are paved. They didn't have closed-toed shoes like we wear today. Their roads, at least to get from city to city, were dirt. So if it rained, your feet got muddy. If the livestock had finished digesting their food, well, your feet got covered with, I'll just show you. Now, I'd always wondered why that emoji is a thing, and now I finally found a use for it. I'm so excited, right? And so Jesus assumes the form of the servant who is literally washing the world away from the feet of the disciples to drive this lesson home. It's not about earthly power. It's about emptying yourself. It's about becoming a servant. It's about washing the world off of people as a way to tangibly demonstrate the love of God. Getting this? This is huge as you look at this palm branch in your hand. In theory, we give lip service to this, right? In theory, we say, I want to wash the world off of people. I want to help people deal with the sin in their lives. That's what I'm all about in my faith. Yeah, I can do that. But yet, when it's a sin that we don't like, we turn our backs and walk away. And I wonder, when we label sin and we refuse to love somebody through it if we're not guilty of the greater sin when we turn our back when God has called us to make a difference. You see, sin is messy business. Entering into sin means that you're going to get your hands dirty. You can't help somebody deal with the sin in their lives without entering into the mess with them. Now, I'm not saying taking on their sin is your own, but I am saying that you help somebody deal with the root cause of it and help them see another way. Because here's the deal. In washing the disciples' feet and going to Gethsemane and being arrested and finally going to the cross, Jesus shows us that he completely enters into our mess. And I don't know about you, but I've got a mess. Do you have a mess? Yes. We all have a mess. Jesus enters completely into it. All of the dirt and all of the poo. I told you that emoticon came in useful, right? And he makes a way for us to come out of it. He cleanses us. He washes all of it away and he raises us up above it. Sets our feet on a different path. Gives us closed-toed shoes. It says, now wash the mess off of other people because I've washed you. He says that's what we're to be for each other, but you're not going to get fame or glory or fortune. In fact, you're going to get judgment probably because people are going to say, what are you doing with all of those sinners? You must be a sinner too. That was all of Jesus' life and ministry. And Jesus would say, no, it's not the healthy that need a physician, it's the sick. I've come to save sinners. He would tell after Zacchaeus and eating dinner with the tax collector and getting judged for that in Luke's gospel, he would say, I came to seek out and to save the lost. That's the example that Jesus gave us, but we've got to lay our expectations for greatness and grandeur down so that we can wash the world and the mess off of people's lives. And it's not quick, and it's not painless, and it's not easy, but it's the life to which Jesus calls us to. Well, after this event, they go out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus is teaching them along the way. If you read John's gospel, most of John's gospel is actually the events of the last couple of days of Jesus' life. And as they're walking along the way, Jesus begins teaching, greater love has no one than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. This is my commandment, that you love one another as God has loved you. When you do, you will show the world that you are my disciples. As they're walking along to the garden, Jesus is teaching his disciples. Read John's gospel at the end. Start in chapter 13 and keep going. Then Jesus goes into Gethsemane and he begins to pray. And this is where I want to focus the rest of our time because this is the moment that our whole sermon series has been building up to. Some argue that the most significant event in Jesus' life was the cross. Others argue that Gethsemane was the crowning moment of Jesus' obedience and that the cross only is the tangible sign of what Jesus had already done in the garden. I want to read this story to you because it's so powerfully significant for us as we prepare to come to the Lord's table today. And we're going to read it from Matthew's gospel. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to look sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and he prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour, he asked Peter. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away for a second time and prayed, my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said, are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come and the Son of Man is being delivered into the hands of sinners. 3 times, Jesus prays, Father, if it is possible, execute this in another way. Help me to avoid the cross. Yet not my will, but yours be done. 3 times Jesus prays this while his disciples sleep. You see, this was the temptation all the way in the beginning of the Gospels, to shortcut the Father's plan, to do it another way. Jesus still in that moment, when he says, pray that you don't fall into temptation to the sleeping disciples, he's self-disclosing. He's saying, that's why I'm up praying, so I don't short-circuit the Father's plan. I know that they're coming to arrest me right now, and I could get on the road in the darkness and go over the mountains, and they'll never find me. But I've come to live out the will of the Father, not my own will. In this moment, Jesus empties himself of everything but love for us in obedience to the Father, while his disciples sleep and sinners arrest him. How far are you willing to go for Jesus? How much of yourself are you willing to pour out to see the Father's will accomplished in you? That's the question that we're confronted with today as we lay our palm branches down and seek to live into the ministry of Christ. How much are you willing to give? Today is a day where we reconcile 2 very competing things. And we take up who is King and Lord of our lives. We move from sovereign over our own lives to servant, following the will of Jesus. From being in complete control of our lives to surrendering completely to the will of the Father. That's what the whole last week of Jesus' life was about, and that's what we're about today. You know, I asked earlier how the response would have been if the Astros had lost Game 7. What would have been said on social media? Who would have been at the airport as they got off the airplane? How many people would have been there? I suspect it would have been their families and a handful of others. That's what happened to Jesus too. He was abandoned and denied, rejected and left to die alone. But yet he still persisted for you and for me. One of the things that really touched me is that when the Astros came home, they not only began raising money to help with Harvey relief, but they rolled up their sleeves and immediately started serving. I have a picture of them serving meals at Ellington Field to the National Guard, women and men who were stationed here. They didn't let glory go to their heads, but they immediately set out to help the city that they called home and that they loved recover from this disaster. We won't experience the miracle of Easter until we've laid it all down, emptied ourselves of everything that we want to completely take up the will of the Father. And so as we come and we celebrate this meal that Jesus gave to his disciples and to us on the night that he was arrested, we've never done it this way before. And this is what I'm going to ask of you. In a symbolic manner, reminiscent of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples, I'm going to ask you in a moment to come down to these washing stations. I'm not going to have your feet washed today. But we are going to have volunteers wash your hands. We're going to pour a little bit of water over them and dry them as symbolic of washing the world off of you and symbolic of what Jesus has asked us to do for others. And then you'll move to either side where you're sitting and you'll receive communion and come back to your seats for a time of prayer as we end our worship service together.